My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Of all the guests that I have had on over the course of the last 4.5 years, there are few that have been more memorable than Jill Escher. There have been some that have been more famous. There have been some that have been more controversial. But in terms of being informational, in terms of allowing you to sit in someone else's chair, to walk in someone else's shoes, as difficult as those shoes may be, in terms of being a warrior for a cause that needs advocates everywhere that it could find, I don't know that you'd find a better person to talk to than Jill Escher. If you're not familiar with her, she is the president of the National Council on Severe Autism and a board member of Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area. She also happens to be the mother of 2 autistic adult children, and I am very, very pleased that during Autism Awareness Month, particularly on a week where there's been quite a bit of news in terms of a new report from the CDC on the prevalence of autism, that Jill Escher has returned to the program. Jill, it's great to talk to you again.
Hi, Frank. Hello from California, and thanks so much for having me again.
My pleasure. So for people that have not heard our previous conversations, give us the Reader's Digest version of your story. How did you make the transition from being a mom of 2 autistic children to being such an activist on behalf of autistic children and parents?
Well, like a lot of families, I would say the vast majority of families, autism struck us out of the blue. My son, Johnny, is now 26, and my daughter, Sophie, is almost 19. They both have what's called profound autism. They are nonverbal. They have very limited daily living skills, and they require 24/7 care. And Johnny, on top of all of that, has quite a few very challenging behaviors. He has a history of aggression and self-injury and property destruction. Sophie, on the other hand, is little Miss Cutie Pie, Sweetie Pie. She's pretty mild with her behaviors, but still requires 24/7 assistance with everything. So, autism kind of struck us like a nuclear bomb, and I had no idea what caused it. There was not a single clinician anywhere who could explain what caused it in my children. And all around me, I saw more and more and more autism cases, and really no real answers as to what was causing this. There were no real answers as to really meaningful treatments. And even worse, we see a system that is really unprepared to serve the long-term needs of these children as they grow up and as their parents, like me, age. So it's a multifold problem, and you mentioned the new CDC report, and we see rates going up.
In the last quarter century that you've been involved in this, have things gotten better? Are services better? Is it, I hate to use the term easier because I can't imagine what it must be like to be in your shoes as the parent of one 3-year-old who, it doesn't have any autistic tendencies. Is it easier, though, to be a parent of an autistic child today than it was 26 years ago?
No. I'd love to say, oh, there's so much more awareness and, we've made so much progress in understanding autism and providing options for autism. But the answer is no, it's not much easier. Yes, I mean, when Johnny was first diagnosed, I would say autism wasn't that well known of a disorder. But now it's so much more well known because there's so much more autism.
Mm-hmm.
When Johnny was diagnosed, the prevalence was, 1 in a couple hundred, and now it's 1 in 31 as of the report today. And, it's not like we're keeping up. It's not like we're keeping up with demand. It's not like there's so many more psychiatrists. It's not like there's so many more housing programs. It's not like there's so many more, jobs programs for, kids like mine. It continues to be a struggle for most families affected by it.
So as you alluded to, that CDC report, it now says there's 1 in 31 children that have autism. That's up from 1 in 36 in the most recent numbers before this, and that's up from 1 in about 150 about 25 years ago. What's your reaction to those numbers as both an advocate and a parent? First of all, do you believe those numbers? Are those numbers real? I know a lot of people over the years, and I'm sure this makes you cringe when you hear it, but a lot of people over the years have said that this is a function of more diagnosis of autism rather than more actual cases of autism. And other people have said that there's some people being diagnosed with autism that may not actually be autistic as we understand the term. That 1 in 31 number, do you believe that's an accurate number?
I do believe it's probably an underestimate from what I've been seeing. So, yes, I think it's fairly accurate. It also varies a little bit by region. So remember, this is sort of a broad estimate. We seem to have higher rates in places like California, New Jersey, and lower rates in more rural areas. But I will say this. You are very right to call out this ongoing debate about the autism numbers. I mean, in the 60s, the numbers were like 0.01 to 0.05%. And then, in the 90s, we saw really a kind of dramatic change upwards to the point where 22 years ago, we began seeing what you just said, 1 in 150, which is 0.67%, so below 1%, now to 3.22%. So it's an exponential curve, an exponential increase. And yes, I think that the mainstream media is very, very quick, kind of in a knee-jerk, kind of broken record fashion, year after year, to blame this on, greater ascertainment, more awareness, diagnostic shifts. But, the data doesn't really bear that out, unfortunately. Even when you limit the autisms that are detected by the CDC studies to the forms that have intellectual disability or even have borderline intellectual disability. So intellectual disability is IQ under 70 and under, borderline is 70 to 85. We still see dramatic increases in those subgroups. The increases aren't just limited to those who have higher IQs, like 85 and up, although there is, of course, growth in that category as well. We also see this dramatic growth with regards to 4-year-olds who are being ascertained. And those 4-year-olds aren't becoming autistic because they saw someone on TikTok. These aren't parents who are trying to get more time on tests. All those other factors that, have been invoked to explain away the autism increase really don't apply to these little preschoolers. These are preschoolers who are missing important developmental milestones, and we're still seeing increases, among them. So, those other explanations don't really explain what we're seeing in the numbers, especially these really, really dramatic increases. And then again, on the ground, what we're seeing are classroom after classroom after classroom filled with children who clearly have observably clear impairments, and a greater and greater demand year after year for special education teachers, for autism aides, for adult programs, for housing. The need for services should be telling us something. That's an objective standard.
At 31 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Jill Escher. We're talking a little bit about autism. It is Autism Awareness Month, and it's very apropos that we're just seeing this CDC report that shows a whopping 1 out of 31 children have autism. Jill, some experts say that minority children are now more likely to be diagnosed due to better access to services. Is this something you're seeing on the ground, and is that truly a good sign, or does it mask some deeper inequities?
Yeah, good question. The CDC reports definitely reflect this unexpected shift where families that were in higher socioeconomic levels, white families, they were more likely to have children diagnosed with autism than those from lower SES and from minority groups. That in the last, 4 or 5 years has notably changed, where the white population has a little bit more than plateaued. It's increasing, but not increasing at the rate it was before. And now we see a rapidly increasing rate among Blacks, Hispanics, Asians. And the reason for that may be in part due to increasing access to diagnosis, increasing awareness, more case finding. On the other hand, these cases are outstripping the white prevalence number, and that is not explained. Nobody I've talked to seems to be able to understand that. So I think that this phenomenon is poorly understood right now, and I don't think it's just about ascertainment methods. Now, on the ground, are we seeing this? I live out on the other side of the country. I'm in California. I'm in an extremely diverse area. Every possible ethnicity lives in my area. And I will say just my kind of interactions with the community, it would suggest that there is some truth to this. I'm seeing, more and more Asian families, more and more Hispanic families, much more than I saw, I would say, a decade ago.
So obviously, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made quite a bit of news on this front, and he's called autism an epidemic that dwarfs COVID. As the mother of 2 adult children with autism, how do you feel about that comparison? Is it a helpful wake-up call? Is it harmful rhetoric? Is it possibly both? Is it something else entirely? What do you make of how he characterized this?
Yeah, well, I should say I met him in person on Autism Awareness Day, April 2nd this year when I was in D.C. So that was interesting to be able to talk to him personally, albeit briefly. But I definitely don't agree with him on certain things, but I do 100% agree with him on the autism epidemic point. He is clearly correct here. I mean, the data is just overwhelming and obvious and has not been explained by other factors. So he is correct, and he's right to raise the alarm. It's a very, very significant crisis, I think, for our country, and it hasn't been taken as seriously as it should be. So I do give him credit for that. Now, having said that, he said things that are questionable, shall I say. For example, he said in that cabinet meeting that was televised that in September, he's going to have answers about what's causing the autism epidemic.
Yeah, that's the next thing I was going to ask you about. You must be relieved that they're going to have all these answers by September.
And I do not believe that. I don't know how that is possible. I've been involved in autism research for 20 years, And I've worked with great scientists on really compelling questions, and we are still quite a ways away from having a really substantial understanding of what the risk factors are for autism. So, no, I don't believe him. He's most likely going to come up with something related to vaccines because that is his interest, and that's what he's talked about before. But from what I've seen, I just can't imagine that he'll have something scientifically valid to present in September.
So and obviously we'll all be watching and waiting with bated breath to see what they do come up with. But many in the autistic self-advocacy community, they were deeply offended by Kennedy's comments, saying they fuel stigma and fear. Do you think there's a risk that framing autism as a public health emergency makes life harder for autistic individuals and their families?
No, of course not. No. I mean, you could say that about any disorder. I mean, it doesn't make your life, the fact that it's an emergency can only help our community because we need that kind of focused attention. We need this sense of urgency. We need to be putting our money in important directions where we actually can find answers about risk factors, about prevention, about treatment, about long-term care, right? I feel like we've been living in a decade of utter complacency, kind of twiddling our thumbs and not really coming up to speed. We're way behind the ball. So I think that, no, it can only help people with autism. Yes, I can appreciate that there are some people, unlike my children and unlike most people with autism, who are very articulate and very independent and who are cognitively intact. And good for them. If they have the ability to even feel stigma, to even understand what stigma means, they are highly privileged. And if that's their biggest problem, more power to them. I wish my kids were in such a fine situation. But the situation is not like that for most people. It's very grim, and we need, all hands on deck, to help solve this crisis.
Do we in society overuse terms like on the spectrum? Sometimes I've even noticed folks that I've observed in the media, even friends of mine, referring to somebody that may have a personality quirk and say, oh, that person's on the spectrum. That's an indication that they're on the spectrum. When in actuality, I don't believe that those people are actually on the spectrum. Do we overuse that term?
Yes and no. So first of all, let's be clear that the CDC studies, they aren't looking for kids like on the spectrum, like especially like these 4-year-olds. They're looking for kids with like clinical diagnoses, right? They have to have certain indicators of significant impairment that go far beyond, quirkiness and, geekiness and spectrumishness. But I would say in the broader kind of popular culture, however, yeah, there is some kind of using aspiness or spectrumishness as an indicator for things that aren't really disabling. But that's something else. Most kids diagnosed with autism are really disabled. They don't just have a difference. They're not just, it's not like a benign variant of, being human. It's something that really is life limiting and really makes them more dependent and decreases their life's opportunities.
What would you like to see from a federal government that's serious about improving life for autistic people and their families, especially those like your family that are dealing with severe autism?
Well, many things. I mean, the federal government is the biggest funder of autism research. So, number one, just as sort of a basic need, we need to understand what's causing autism because we cannot sustain these rates I mean, we're already way past the breaking point in terms of our service systems. And we still have very, very little understanding of what the causes are. And so I'm very devoted to that personally. I put a lot of effort into investigating new hypotheses. And we need to be doing more of that rather than asking the same old questions over and over and over and over again. So that's number one. Number two, we need research into treatment because especially for this severe population, the severity of behaviors strongly correlates to quality of life, strongly correlates to economic burden, and strongly correlates to possibilities for independence. So we need more and more treatments that are efficacious in mitigating severe behaviors in some of these children. I mean, this can range from anything from perseveration on an object to something like my son used to do, which is scratching himself, ripping off his skin, attacking other people, right, and everything in between. That's really a huge need, and there's also a huge need for clinicians who are capable of working with this population. Now, the third thing is, of course, the giant elephant in the room, which is long-term care, right? We have now an unprecedented number of people who just can't take care of themselves and will be reliant on systems like Medicaid to provide them the services they need to live and hopefully to thrive. So there's a lot of talk about cutting Medicaid, but we have to be realistic here. We have to, grapple with the numbers of people, especially the young adults and children who will need lifespan care. It's not like we can willy-nilly just cut these programs without having a really dire effect on, now, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
You indicated that the numbers show California, where you're based, has the highest autism rate, 1 in 18 children, I think, right? Is it 1 in 18?
Oh, gosh, what was it? I believe it was 5.3%. Yes.
I mean, that's incredible. Is California doing something wrong, or is it doing something right in terms of recognizing and reporting autism?
Yeah, great question. As I understand it, so I'm in California, but I'm not in the area that was surveyed for the CDC study. So the area surveyed was in northern San Diego County, the south part of the state. I'm in the state. But from what I understand, San Diego County has been the beneficiary of really strong efforts to get pediatricians and other clinicians to screen children for autism. So they probably do more screening down there as a consequence of these clinical efforts. So they're probably capturing, more cases. But what was also really remarkable about that was in the 4-year-olds, we saw, I think, about 9% of all children or all boys. I think they captured 9% of all boys who are 4 years old in that San Diego study. That is something kind of crying to be better understood. Is that real? Because that number is so shocking. One has to ask, are these clinicians really overdiagnosing in 4-year-olds? That was a really unexpected number, and it would be very interesting to go back and do an audit of that to figure out if it's right or wrong. Now, when I talked to Dr. Walter Zaharodny, who's been the lead investigator for the CDC in New Jersey for 22 years, he thinks that the California numbers aren't crazy because they do correlate with what he's found in some of his studies in New Jersey. So he said, well, we're finding the same rates in Ocean County in New Jersey. So he did not raise his eyebrows.
Before I let you go, and it's always such a treat to talk with you. I wish we had longer. There's 2 interesting studies that I read articles about that I have to get your take on it, just because you've been so attuned to the research for so long. One indicating that gestational mothers who are dealing with diabetes have a higher prevalence of autism. And then there was another that indicated that there was some sort of a link between fluoridated water and autism. Have you had an opportunity to look at either of those, and what was your take on either or both?
Yeah, unfortunately, only glancingly. So I can't really speak intelligently about them, but I do caution against overinterpreting these things because often we see correlations that don't have to do with causation. So, for example, a woman who has diabetes might be at greater risk of having a child with autism, but it might not be the diabetes itself. You know, you might ask, well, why does she have diabetes in the first place? There may be some complex interplay, a gene-environment interplay that we don't really understand yet. So I just invite caution.
Lastly, Jill, let's say somebody is struggling because they are a parent of an autistic child themselves, and they don't know what to do, where to go. Give them some advice. What are the resources they should be keeping an eye out for? What is the what are the things that they need to be doing that somebody may not think to mention to them?
Yeah. Well, you know, definitely, I think people with children with autism need all the help they can get. It can be a very isolating experience. Sometimes parents, I mean, we had a parent who came to our event in D.C. Who basically hadn't left her child for like 20 years. I mean, it can be extremely demanding, extremely stressful, extremely isolating. Parents can feel, I hate to say it, quite despondent, especially when their kid is more severe.
Sure.
So,
No, sure, I can imagine.
Yeah, especially when the kid is severe and, they're not meeting any of their milestones. They're not playing with toys. They're not talking. They don't understand what their birthday is. They aren't watching TV and they don't know what a Disney princess is. And they keep repeating the same word over and over again. Or, maybe they keep taking off their clothes because, they're overwhelmed by this, the sensory touch of their clothing. Or maybe they're screaming at night. Maybe they can't sleep. Like I didn't sleep for like 20 years, with Johnny. Things can be very, very hard. And so I think that parents have to go easy on themselves, get as much help as they possibly can, get the best medical care for their kids that they possibly can to reduce, their anxiety, to reduce their sensory overwhelm, to reduce, whatever, challenging behaviors they have. And just also know that things can mellow out somewhat over time and to have some hope. Clearly, New York, the autism numbers, I've seen some of the Medicaid autism numbers, they're going up, 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 up. If you are in New York City, please get in touch with my friend Jackie Cianzo at SNAC NYC, who is one of the best resources for autism anywhere in the state of New York. She's amazing. And they're based in Midtown Manhattan, and she, I'm sure, would be happy to talk to you.
Jill Escher, it is always a delight to talk with you, although that seems like an odd choice of word given the weighty subjects that we talk about. Thank you for all the work that you've done on behalf of autistic young people, autistic adults, and their parents and their family members. And we'll chat again in September, hopefully, when we find out what the cure for autism is, or what the cause of autism is. We're going to figure out the
cause of autism. Yes, please have me back. I'll be happy. And I love New York so much. I was just there last week. I love it, and my love to all of your listeners.
Wonderful. We've got a lot of great listeners in California, too. Jill Escher, if you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you can go ahead and give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.